Number 1. George. It was a cold night in early March. This happened a couple of years ago. I had just gotten home from work. I'd been working late that night, so it was close to midnight by the time I walked through the door. I was extremely tired and wanted nothing more than to crack open a cold beer and relax on the couch. So that's exactly what I did. Alcohol always tastes better after a long day's work. I didn't even turn on the TV right away. I just sat there on the couch with my eyes closed and my feet up, trying to forget about how stressful my life had become. I remember getting annoyed while flipping through the channels because nothing seemed interesting. After a few more minutes of scanning, I gave up and decided to just enjoy my beer in silence. Like everything else in my life, peace and quiet was apparently too much to ask for, because not 10 seconds later, all the lights in my house suddenly went out. You know that faint popping sound that happens just before everything goes dark? Yeah, there's nothing I hate more than hearing that. For some reason, our house always lost power every now and then. Now that I think about it, it still does. Anyway, my first thought was to step outside and see if any of the neighbors were affected. I walked outside and shut the door behind me to keep the heat in, just in case I couldn't get the power back on. It was late, but I could still see at least one house on my street with their lights on, which confirmed that the problem was with my house. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, knowing this would ruin whatever bit of relaxation I was hoping for. I turned to go back inside, but when I grabbed the door handle, it wouldn't budge. I froze, confused. I tried the handle again and again, but it was definitely locked. What the hell was going on? I knocked on the door and called my wife's name, thinking maybe she'd woken up without me realizing. There was no answer. I tried to peek through the window, but it was completely dark inside. I ran around to the back, but that door was locked too. Now I started to panic. My wife usually left the doors unlocked, so it was strange that the back door was locked. I ran around to the side of the house to check the breaker box, and then I stopped dead in my tracks. The hose, which I knew had been neatly coiled, was lying in the grass just below the breaker. That's when it hit me. Someone had cut the power on purpose. Without thinking, I sprinted to the nearest window and looked inside. This time I saw 2 flashlights moving around wildly in the dark, as if 2 people were rummaging through the house. They were stealing stuff. I was furious. The nerve of someone to break in while I was home. I reached into my pocket to call the police, only to realize I'd left my phone on the couch. I cursed under my breath and decided I'd run to the neighbor's house to borrow their phone. But as I started running toward the nearest house, another, more frightening thought hit me. My wife was still inside. She was probably asleep, and she was completely vulnerable to whoever was in there. I couldn't leave her alone for another minute. I sprinted back to my house and grabbed some loose rocks from the yard. I started throwing them at our bedroom window, hoping to wake her up. After the 3rd rock, she opened the window. Before she could say anything, I whispered what was happening and told her to hide in the closet. She didn't ask questions and disappeared inside the room. I then ran to my neighbor's house and knocked urgently on the door. I quickly explained what was going on, and then I used his phone to call the police. I waited on his porch, praying that my wife would be okay. Eventually, the police arrived, and I ran up to one of the cars to explain everything as best I could. They rushed inside, but by then it was too late. The back door was wide open, and whoever had broken in was already gone, along with too many of our valuables to count. My wife was more shaken than I was, and understandably so. What she told me, and the police, made me angry with myself for not protecting her better. To this day, I can't forgive myself for leaving her in the house with those criminals. Apparently, just seconds after I told her to hide, she heard someone kick open the bedroom door. The person stepped into the room and cocked a gun. He stood there, motionless, clearly listening for anyone in the room. She said it was the most terrified she'd ever been. I believe the intruders heard me throwing rocks at the window. The scariest part is that we still live in this house, and we have no plans to move. Sometimes I think about what could have happened if I hadn't stepped outside during those few moments.